We are good to go. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming and welcome to this final session of our Frontline Network Conference. It's been a full and busy day. I've seen people dipping in and out throughout the day, and I hope you found the sessions rewarding, useful, and you've got some new thoughts, new ideas that you can take away during the following days and the following weeks. This is the first time we've done a conference like this online. We've been learning a lot today. We've done smaller things, but to do a big conference like this has been quite a challenge, but we've enjoyed doing it. And as I say, I hope people have found it really, really useful. We're going to have a short conversation, I hope a panel session in a moment. Let me introduce you to the folk who are on the call, and I'm going to ask them just to say a little bit about themselves. Firstly, Ewan Aitken from Cyrenians, who's up in Edinburgh. Ewan's waving, brilliant. Nicola McCrudden, who is across in Northern Ireland. Waving Nicola, thank you. Katie Dalton, Katie's from Cymorth Cymru, and Rick Henderson, who's from Homeless Link, but I think in Brighton today. So we're thrilled that we've got people from all four nations and about as far apart as they could possibly be. I think we got several hundred miles between us all. So it's good to have you. Throughout the day, the sessions have begun to just kind of throw up a number of interesting themes that have come out, and it's the things I think that we hear again and again and again, and the things that we're looking to address in all of our work. We've heard stuff around, again, the need for early interventions to address prevention. We've heard about how important cross-sector work is and people working together, the importance of collaboration and partnership working, that we shouldn't be doing these things on their own. And we've heard a lot about listening closely to lived experience of people that we are working with. And Louise this morning challenged us all to make sure that A, as frontline workers, we look after ourselves, but B, we're not frightened to talk about our experiences and share the things that we know with people who, well, ordinarily might not want to listen. So let me bring in my colleagues and begin our conversation now. I'm just going to ask each to make a short introduction and tell them a little bit about their experience of supporting frontline workers to overcome some of the barriers that they face in their work. So, Ewan, could you kick off first, please?
Thanks, Tim, and it's great to be here. And I suppose it is one of those COVID benefits, if there is such a thing. It seems a contradiction in terms that we can have an event whereby we have people from all four nations together, and that's a good thing in itself. There's a richness just in that learning opportunity. So I'm Ewan Aitken, I'm the Chief Executive of Cyrenians. We're a homelessness charity operating in Scotland. We operate largely in the east coast of Scotland, although we have 4 national projects. And actually you heard from one of our national projects, the Scottish Centre for Conflict Resolution, and my colleague Duncan Gordon in one of your sessions earlier on. We see ourselves as tackling the causes and consequences of homelessness. So we're in the crunchy end of working with folk in crisis and just coming out of crisis, but also trying to stop people getting there in the first place. And that's one of the interesting challenges, of course, because you've then got people in the front line who are working a long way from what people perceive to be the front line, as it were. So if you're working in schools, teaching young people to the skills of conflict resolution, because we know that that's one of the main reasons young people present as homeless. It doesn't feel like you're working in homelessness, you're working in conflict resolution, and yet you are. And how do you connect with colleagues who are working with folk who are rough sleeping? And it's that kind of dynamic that is one of the interesting and challenging parts of an organisation like ours, to keep those two things together, because they feed each other. You can learn from each other. There is a peer practice element to learn from people who are working in very different contexts. We have 52 projects, as I say, both national and within the East Coast. And they are very different because we know the drivers to homelessness are very different. And if you're going to get an understanding about homelessness and its root causes and getting the prevention space, you need to have people working in very different situations. So one of the things that we try and do and make sure to do is that our colleagues spend time with each other, so that they have that kind of understanding and that learning from each other. So that peer practice isn't about working with peers doing the same things. It's also peer practice working with people who are doing very different things and often very far apart things. You know, we run community gardens in hospital grounds, because we know that if you end up in hospital with mental health challenges, you are more likely to become socially isolated and therefore more likely to become homeless again. But if you can create a community in that context, that is less likely to happen. Yeah, it doesn't feel like a homelessness project. It feels like a growing project. But actually the situation, the connections are there, and it's helping people see that connections is one of the key things. And the other thing is, because this is only a kind of brief introduction, is that making sure that I, as the chief executive, I'm not one of the barriers and getting out of the way. When we set up the Frontline Workers Network, the woman Leslie who runs it for us absolutely brilliantly, said to me, "Well, the one thing you can be sure of, Ewan, is that you're not coming because you're not a frontline worker," and that was a good thing to say. And my task as a CEO is to get out of the way as much as possible and trust people to make good decisions and make sure they've got the resources and feel trusted so they can make it, because they are the experts. The last thing I am is the expert, and that's one of the most important parts of this job, is to remind myself that on a daily basis. I hope that's a helpful start, and hand over to colleagues.
Thank you, very helpful, Ewan. Katie, do you want to go next?
Thanks very much, Tim. Prynhawn da, good afternoon, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. Listening to the voices of frontline workers is something that I'm really passionate about. And I'm speaking from Cymorth Cymru. We're the representative body for providers of homelessness, housing and support services in Wales. So have between 80 or 90 member organisations who are delivering frontline services, and really delighted to be working with St Martin's in the Fields to run the Frontline Network Wales, and that we've been establishing this year, and it was really great to see a few Welsh place names being mentioned on the quiz that Tim was doing at the start of the day. I think that a few things that I think we can do to better support frontline staff and remove some of those barriers that we've been talking about today. One thing that we're really passionate about is psychologically informed approaches, and I think often that is focused on the relationship between the person delivering the service and the person using the service, but I think it's fundamentally important that staff also benefit from a psychologically informed approach, that they have access to the support that they need, that they are able to engage in reflective practice. And that means, you know, leaders within organisations and leaders within commissioning bodies allowing that time and allowing that resource for frontline workers to engage in that. And that, I think, leads on to, you know, another issue which I think is really important, is leadership and giving permission to frontline staff. Something that's coming out in our first frontline workers report on Monday is that staff throughout the pandemic were offered to engage in wellbeing activities or to work flexibly around the pandemic, but some of them felt that needed to be reiterated by leaders in the organisation, that it wasn't just about mentioning it once, but it was giving that ongoing permission and explicit assurance that we want you to engage in the wellbeing activities or flexible working, and that wasn't seen as something that you had to feel guilty about. And finally, I think another thing that we can learn from the pandemic is removing bureaucracy and trusting people. We've seen an awful lot happen over the past year and a half, where a lot of those rules and bureaucratic processes have been taken away, and we've enabled frontline workers to use their expertise, their judgment, to make the right decisions, you know, in a crisis situation. And I'd like to see us kind of continue some of that, going back into the new normal, really valuing and respecting that expertise that our frontline workers have in order to deliver the best possible outcomes and support for people. So looking forward to all of your questions today. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Nicola.
Hi, thanks very much, Tim. I'm delighted to be here and be on the panel today. As you can tell by my accent, I'm from Northern Ireland, and I'm Chief Executive Council for the Homeless. We have around about 60 members. Just under half of that would be homeless service providers across Northern Ireland. And I came into post in September, and prior to that, I was self-employed. I was working with Campbell Tkell, some of you might be aware of them. And I'm actually working with the sector to help with the response to the pandemic. And as part of that work, when I was with Campbell Dackel, we set up an operational group of directors within the sector to look exactly at what the issues were that were facing our staff. And we talked to staff directly themselves as well. And there's some really good work came out of that. As a result of that, to take up as Chair at Council for the Homeless in September, I was able to secure funding from the Housing Executive to offer free training across our network on health and well-being and resilience and capacity building. Actually, even given the fact that we were in the middle of pandemic, staff were facing when staff were covering shifts, as other staff were self-isolating, etc., etc. So we had really great attendance at that. And probably what came out top of that was the need for staff to understand what resilience is, and also for managers to understand how to build resilient teams and empower their staff. We offered yoga and mindfulness and all sorts of sessions, which staff felt were really helpful. The issues that are facing us in Northern Ireland, I think at the minute, is around funding and funding pressures, which I'm sure is the same across the board for you all. While demand for services are increasing, unfortunately, we're having difficulties in terms of retaining staff and attracting new talent. And a lot of that's got to do with wage levels. So I'm really keen to give our frontline staff a voice and to be at the table and to actually articulate the challenges that they face. And also that the services that we provide, I mean, essentially it's a blue light service, you know, and I think the pandemic has highlighted at the end of the day that we're an essential public health service, as well as a homelessness, just providing accommodation and support, which is obviously very important. So staff retention and recruitment is challenging, and also staff frustration that things don't seem to change, that people are still falling through the cracks. And that's largely down to the very narrow eligibility criteria of statutory providers. So yeah, lots to talk about, and we're here obviously to support our members and our frontline staff. I'm happy to take questions and engage in this session, and I've probably talked for too long, so sorry, Tim.
Not at all. Thank you, Nicola. Rick.
Yeah, thanks, Tim, and thanks to everyone else. So I'm Rick Henderson, Chief Executive of Homeless Link, national membership body for the homelessness sector. We have about 800, I think at the last count, 876 members across England, probably representing a kind of frontline workforce of somewhere around 15 or 20,000 people. So it's a chunky workforce, actually, that often doesn't get the recognition that I think it deserves. I started my career as a frontline support worker in a residential service many years ago, longer than I care to remember, but I still have fond memories of those days, and have kind of worked my way up through the ranks, so to speak. But I still bear some scars, and also have a lot of fond memories of that work and some of the kind of skills that it develops in you, that ability to cope with very difficult situations, the ability to make decisions at short notice, the empathy, the care and the passion for the work, the ability to get out of bed in the mornings and sometimes stay up really late at night, and all of those things have stayed with me. We do lots of different things really for frontline workers, lots of training, as most of you will probably know, as well as running communities of practice around the country, which are specifically for frontline workers. And one of the things, I'm involved in something called the Kerslake Commission. Lord Kerslake is running a commission at the moment to look at the lessons that we've learned from everyone in, and we'll be presenting those to government and various other audiences. But I'm a member of that commission, and one of the things that I fed in at the first meeting really was that I felt that everyone in really shone a spotlight on frontline workers. We couldn't have done everyone in. We couldn't have done the hotel provision without the willingness of frontline workers to kind of change what they were doing, to go out of their way, in some instances to put themselves at considerable personal risk, actually, in the days before PPE arrived and all of those things. I saw frontline workers going out of their way and showing their commitment in very real kind of ways. And I was very keen that the Kerslake Commission, in its recommendations, do pay due notice to the efforts of frontline workers, and I really hope that that does have a couple of impacts really, other than recognition. The first is around pay and conditions. I think the sector is not good enough when it comes to pay and conditions, so I would like to see some improvement in that space. Also around kind of personal development. One of the other things that is about recruitment. We're doing a piece of work at the moment with National Rail, where we've been working with them to develop some brief videos, which they're going to be showing in train stations and stuff, trying to encourage people to consider the homelessness sector as a kind of career choice. And I think that's really important, because so many of my members tell me they're really struggling to recruit at the moment. And I think that's such a shame, because working in homelessness is so rewarding, or at least it can be so rewarding, that I really want to try and encourage more people to consider this. So that's probably enough from me as an opening gambit.
Thank you, Rick. I think I'm going to just stay with that theme straight away in terms of attracting talent into the sector and the conditions and the pay that people face when they join the sector. So I'm really interested to hear some comments about that. One thing I know about frontline workers is they're not shy. So I'm really keen just for people to join into the conversation and ask us some questions. Set your chat to panelists and attendees, and as we speak, put your questions in there, and we're really keen to pick those up. So in terms of this question about how do we attract talent into the work that we do, how do we retain people, and how do we make this seem not just anything other than a hugely valuable career for people? How do we make the step change from where we are first? Ewan wants to go first, and then I'm going to ask Katie. She'll follow up after that. So
we had some interesting stuff around when we set up Housing First. So we run the Housing First Edinburgh, a collaboration of 7 charities here as part of the kind of work that's happening in Scotland around Housing First. And of course, we needed to kind of learn about how you get folk into that space. I think there was a couple of things that we learned. One was that we needed to stop looking in the obvious places. We heard from the Netherlands that they started looking, almost talent spotting in other places where people were able to do the things that you were describing, like that bit of quick decision making, managing chaos well, those kinds of stuff. And they said that they would spot people in coffee shops managing difficult customers, and they'd go, that's a skill set. We need to manage that. That could be translated across. So thinking in different spaces. So I think a network rail idea is really good. I think the other thing is the narrative about homelessness is really important. And one of the reasons I think we were reasonably successful in the first iteration of homelessness of Housing First was that it appeared to be a solution to a previously intractable problem. So in other words, homelessness seemed like a big problem and nobody knew the answer. Now, let's not kid ourselves. Housing First is not the answer to all the issues of homelessness. Let's be really clear about that. But in terms of the public perception, it was a new answer. It was a new thing that seemed to be providing an answer that previously it seemed just too difficult. So that narrative that there are solutions, and actually people bringing those skills, those human skills, those capacity to be in trusted relationships, those capacity to be deeply empathetic, are the way in which solutions can be found by the people in crisis themselves. Right. So it's not about fixing people; it's going on a journey with people. So play into that narrative of hope rather than of that it's all over and this is a crisis that can't be solved. I think is as important as the stuff you do supporting people through the progression in their own careers.
Thank you, Ian. Katie.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything that others have said about pay and recognition. And I think, one of the things that we've experienced over that kind of decade of austerity is local authorities being squeezed and squeezed and squeezed. And therefore, services are commissioned on real bare bones. Organisations that have wanted to pay fair wages have really struggled to find the resource to do that. And I think not just frontline workers, but also the differentials for managers as well, because why on earth would you take on a management position if actually, you're not getting kind of recognised and rewarded for the additional responsibility and stress that will be placed upon you. So I think commissioning plays a really important part, and certainly, you know, we've had a very difficult funding environment for the past 10 years, but for the most recent budget, we saw a £40 million uplift in the housing support grant budget, which is the successor to Supporting People. And straight away we said to government and local authorities, yes, you will want to commission new services, but please plough some of this money into existing services so that staff can receive an uplift, and that we can also build in that reflective practice and psychological support, because, you know, providing that counselling and psychological support for staff costs money, and now is the opportunity to do that. Let's not waste it. I absolutely agree on looking in different places for transferable skills. You know, when I worked for a support provider, there was someone who used to be a hairdresser who was fantastic at building relationships and trust with people, and she brought that with her to become a support worker. And of course she did the induction and the training, but actually those values and those instinctive skills around building relationships are really important. And then finally, I think it's about organisations thinking about the processes that they use to recruit. And we've heard some interesting examples of organisations that have tried to do it differently, remove some of the barriers that may be often perceived barriers to people, you know, in terms of the person specification that may well have put people off before, and try to really rethink that process so that they're attracting as many people as possible. So I think I saw Rick put his hand up, so he'll be keen to come in.
Thank you, Nicola. Rick, yeah.
Yeah, I'm just staying on this theme of narrative. I think this is very, very significant. I think so. My oldest son is 27 years old, and he works in adoption and fostering. And I've been talking to him about whether or not he would consider a kind of shift into homelessness. And what he told me was really interesting. And it's all about narrative. Whether we like it or not, the popular misconception of homelessness is probably majors on two areas. The first is kind of homeless hostels. The model of the old school homelessness hostel, where essentially the jobs that people imagine might exist in those spaces are fundamentally sort of custodial, you know, kind of quasi prison officer kind of roles that nobody, you know, very few people would actually want to do. And the other popular misconception, or the thing that people understand, is kind of, you know, soup runs and street-based activity where most people would assume that work is done by volunteers. So I can remember my son being quite surprised to hear that there is a kind of vast array of different kind of jobs that you might do within the homelessness sector, from kind of working in kind of day activities to renovation of buildings to kind of horticulture and employment support, psychologically informed work, housing first, and so on. And I don't think people know this. I don't think people know this at all. So I think we have to take some responsibility for the narrative in this space, and actually kind of, you know, sell this a bit more. The only other thing I'd like to mention at this point is that we should also remember that sometimes when you're in your service and you're looking around for staff, you could do worse than look amongst your kind of service user population as well, because there are some very, very, very good examples of people going from being service users to service workers, and I think that there's you know, some of us are doing that, and there are some great stories, but it's not universally done. And I think that every service should be looking within its client group for potential support staff, frontline workers as well.
Completely agree. Thank you, Rick. Nicola, have you got anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with everything that everyone has said. And actually, we ran a very successful recruitment campaign earlier on this year with COVID funds. I think what happened was it maybe came too late in terms of, you know, the emergency funds that were available for staff, and came a bit late. So, you know, people, there's also the thing with the funding cycle here with the annual budget, and it's very hard to attract people, and particularly in your monitoring rounds and getting staff. All that really does need to be looked at. But we still have supporting people funding, but there hasn't been uplifted in 13 years. So essentially, it's a 30% real cut, and that has had huge challenges for the sector. But getting back to the recruitment campaign, I mean, what we did was we went to our frontline staff and said, right, we did a video, you know, and it was like, talk about your job, you know, what's it like to do your job, you know, just on a normal day. And the video ran very successfully, and we did it through a Facebook platform. which was really helpful. So you're getting that right kind of age group. But I think what we would benefit from here, because we're quite small, is some kind of a central way of being able to process applications. And because what happened then was people then went off to individual providers and had to fill out application forms. And it's about what you said, Katie, about the barriers. We need to try and reduce as many barriers and hurdles as we possibly can to get people who are interested to come in. But we're competing with the likes of the supermarkets. They're often offering the same wage, if not more, and it's a lot less stressful. So it definitely is a challenge, but not something that I think is insurmountable. But I think we need to sell ourselves better as well in terms of the additional things that we can offer, the training and the support and accreditation and all of that goes with it, and more than anything, the kind of human benefits, as I would describe it as. You get much more than just your wages at the end of the day. It is about giving back and being able to sell that. Say this isn't, it isn't just a job. It's much more rewarding than that. So I think selling those benefits is really, really important going forward. But if you don't have the money, I think this is going to be a major challenge for our sector in terms of retaining and recruiting new talent.
Thank you. Katie's want to come in straight back. Is that the same?
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to mention, I think one of the barriers that we often face is a kind of professional snobbery, where if you work for the NHS or registered social care services, then there is an element of certainly from people outside of the homelessness and housing support, that this is a real job with real qualifications and progression. And sometimes it feels like the homelessness and housing support sector is kind of looked down upon, and that often impacts on the sort of partnership working that you can have in some places, and the being taken seriously when as a support worker you're having conversations with the NHS. But I think it probably also does impact on recruitment, and we sometimes see people leave this sector to go for either better paid jobs within the NHS, or certainly jobs where they can see a clearer path of progression to more senior roles that maybe don't exist as frequently within our sector. So I think that's another of the barriers that we need to overcome as well.
Thank you. There's lots of kind of stuff in the chat just coming through, just kind of reinforcing some of this. A mood that salaries have not moved on for quite a long time, which is disappointing to hear. Often when I finish meetings, we're not quite going to finish yet, I kind of say to people, what are we going to do next, which is our next step to do? And I'm interested in that areas around salaries, around accreditation and training, around recruitment. What do you think is the kind of next step that we might be able to begin to do something fairly quickly and fairly tangibly? I don't know who wants to take that first. Rick, is that a question for you?
Yeah, there's a couple of things, isn't it? The first thing is we need to keep the staff that we've got. And in order to keep the staff that we've got, we need to make sure that their terms and conditions are competitive. We need to, in particular, what we need to do is give people that long-term certainty that they're going to be able to, for example, get a mortgage, and be able to make kind of life plans, knowing that their job is safe. And I think, organisations, employers should give their staff that certainty. Of course, a lot of them do. And there are many, many people that have been working in frontline services for many, many years. But this kind of constant cycle of that's created by competitive tendering really needs to stop, and I think it will. I really hope that it will stop as a result of everyone in. One of the things I'm kind of saying a lot at the moment is that I think post-COVID we need to be commissioning for collaboration and not for competition, and I think that will be one of the recommendations of the Kerslake Commission, or at least I hope it will. And it's entirely within our gift. It's entirely within the gift of local authorities, the central government, to give us the longer term funding settlements as organisations, which then mean that we can make those long term commitments to our staff. So although it's not a quick fix, it is possible to imagine that happening within a period of time, because the spending review hopefully is going to happen later this year, and I know that ministers are very keen to get a longer term settlement for the sector, and we're working with government to kind of help to do that. But in the meantime, I do think that there's probably quite a lot that we could do to look at employment opportunities for people with lived experience, looking outside of the usual kind of suspects. I really like that idea that Ewan mentioned earlier about just kind of going out on the streets and and actively seeking people that are demonstrating the kind of qualities that we want to see in our staff, you know, in other aspects of life. And then the bit that we can all do immediately, I think, is just allow and enable all of our staff to engage in activities that they find supportive and that assist with their resilience. We can all, every single one of us that's a boss on this call, can create the conditions for our staff to have time and the encouragement to just live and learn and enjoy and be happy in their work.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rick. Ewan, sorry, I missed Nicola's hand, but I'll go to you first and come to Nicola next. I looked away for a critical second.
Sorry, you want to come in? Yeah, sure. I mean, I think this whole thing about the whole package is really, really important. I noticed somebody put something about training and university training. So we did a thing where we raised some money and used that to subsidise a course that we worked with the university to design around. So it was a master's module in frontline work, and it was through our health and homelessness inclusive, homelessness inclusive health centre at the university. And so you design a course that meets that need, and then you can subsidise it, and that in itself can be a benefit and a progression benefit and so on. But the point about Commission 2 is, I think, is really interesting, because it kind of assumes that our primary resources need to come from the public sector. And of course, we do need to work in collaboration with the public sector and find ways in which we can do that. And what we don't want to be doing is subsidising the public sector in the sense that they can do things even more cheaply because we bring money to the table. But if we think about who we are and what strengths we've got, and how can we generate income ourselves, and that's partly through fundraising, but it's also partly through entering the world of social enterprise. So one of the reasons that we're able to do what we do in terms of the package that we offer is that we run 4 social enterprises, and the money that generates actually in our turnover is about 28% of our turnover. But what that does is it gives us a flexibility about how that money is used. So we're not, the answer, can you get an uplift, is didn't get off the council, ceases to be the conversation. It becomes much more a decision for me rather than a decision for the commissioner as to whether my staff get an uplift. Because we generate income that we have flexibility with. Now, I know that we in the third sector have the problem with the word profit. We've got to kind of get over that. And we've got to understand that the generating of income and surplus through activities that can play to our strengths gives us a flexibility that will allow us to invest in our staff and get us better at our job, and are therefore more liable to win some of those contracts down the line. And finally, I would be true to say that I am seeing a shift in commissioning. So the last 2 contracts that we've just won have been for 5 years with a 3-year option. That's a completely different conversation.
Very good.
Completely, and it's just as political accountable. It's the point that you made, Rick. It didn't need a change in law to do that. It just took a change in managing risk. And that's all it was. So, but I think we need to be a bit braver about taking responsibility ourselves for generating at least some of the income to give us the flexibility to invest in staff so that we can do the other stuff well.
Thank you. Nicola.
Yeah, and I agree with all of that. We're in a slightly different situation in Northern Ireland in terms of our funding. It's not, it's a different way our funding model works. But I'm just going to pick up on the point that Katie was saying about, I guess our services and staff that work in our service have been seen a bit like the poor cousin, in comparison to health. And a number of our staff would actually be registered with the Health and Social Care Council. So there is a real differentiation there in terms of wages. And in terms of perhaps recognition as well by some sectors. But I think there is something to be said about having that kind of professional network for our staff. And I think Frontline Network is absolutely excellent in doing that and is really, really critical. And that is something that we can build upon. I know that I mean, I touched on accreditation. We don't have a qualification that we can offer here for housing support workers. I'll probably be having conversations with some of you after this, but I do think that would be really beneficial, because I know in a previous life I was a director of the Chartered Institute of Housing and worked very closely with the housing executive in terms of getting their staff professionally qualified and accredited and recognised. As such, I would really like to do something similar with our sector as well. But of course, whenever you have more qualified staff, the wages need to be commensurate to the qualifications as well. I think we have highly skilled, highly professional staff, but I do think that they should be recognised and been able to take qualifications and have qualifications in homelessness services. And I think that will be a huge beneficial leap for the sector overall.
Thank you. Katie.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Nicola, and I think that one of the things that's come out of the Homelessness Action Group process that's happened in Wales is there are recommendations that are focused on workforce, and I expect there to be some work that starts over the coming months that really does look at things like recognition, reward, but also that qualification and progression issue as well, and having a career in the sector and having that more widely recognised. I think it's a really fine balance to find, I think, and there's been similar things in social care in Wales around, qualifications and things like that. And it's getting that balance between having something where people feel recognised and valued, that there is progression and professional respect, but not putting too much of what appears to be maybe an academic burden on that might put some people off from coming into the sector. So I think it's a real fine balance to have, but I do believe that we need to kind of tackle this head on in Wales and hope to do so. We're also looking at running a sort of recruitment campaign with the extra £40 million that has been really welcome from the Welsh Government. It obviously means that we need to recruit a bunch more people into the sector, and as everyone's described, that's quite challenging. So I may well be on the phone to a few of you after this to get your tips for that. I agree that the annual funding thing is really tricky, and particularly for those of us in devolved areas. You know, our Welsh Government says to us, we get our annual funding settlement from the UK Government, so there's no way that we can make multi-year commitments. I mean, I believe that's a political choice, and if you want to prioritise a certain policy within your government, you could commit to that, but I understand where they're coming from, and, you know, anything that the UK Government can do to go to multi-year settlements will certainly help the devolved institutions, because that creates huge uncertainty for frontline workers. And I think, you know, going back to the stuff on you know, local organisations fundraising and being able to kind of, you know, regardless of what the local authority or the commissioner does, being able to fund uplifts. I think, you know, that's absolutely right, but I think we should absolutely be calling out commissioners and saying you need to make this funding available, and it shouldn't come down to our fundraising. That should be an additional add-on. Obviously, you know, organisations need to do some of that, because we know ultimately commissioners won't give us what we want, but we also need to be, I think, standing up and saying it's not good enough for you not to be doing that, and then going to, you know, the Welsh Government or UK Government and saying it's absolutely unacceptable that you're not funding local authorities with enough funding to do that. One of the things that's coming out of our report that we're publishing next week is that staff really experienced a real difference in the wellbeing support that they were offered, depending on the size of the organisation and often the fundraising capacity of that organisation. So we had everything from organisations that have really brilliant branding, public profile, operate in multiple local authorities in Wales, who have quite a strong fundraising power, and when able then to buy in things like psychological support, or housing associations who can kind of, you know, spread the cost across different types of services. And then you have small support providers working in, you know, one rural local authority area, and they just do not have the funds to put that sort of stuff on. And one of the things that we've recommended is the Welsh Government consider what support they can provide nationally, you know, along similar lines to the support that's available to NHS staff, that would kind of remove some of that inequity really between organisations of different sizes and different resources, but try and ensure that frontline staff can get equitable access to support when they need it, you know, because we recognise that they're doing one of the most challenging jobs you can do, and they absolutely need that support to, as Rick said, build up that resilience and keep working in the sector and having the transformational impact that they're having.
Thank you, Katie. Let me just move our conversation on a little bit. We were challenged this morning by Louise Casey, who essentially analysed where we are as a nation and gave us a number of 16.4 million people are likely to be affected by poverty and homelessness in the coming year or so. She didn't quite put a timescale on it, but nevertheless, she painted a picture of great challenges ahead. And I think the phrase that she uses, I wrote down, we are at the beginning of a long climb. And I think she's right in that analysis. Certainly from where we're all sitting, we are, I think, aware of increased demand on all our services. So I'm interested to hear from the panel, given the outlook that we've got, how can we begin to support our staff, those working on the front line, to take a deep breath after a very, very difficult year, to begin what is going to be a long climb over the months and weeks, the weeks and months to come? Who fancies taking that first? Rick.
Well, yeah. The first thing is, you know, can people please make sure they take their annual leave? Because you're gonna need the break, right? So you know, I keep hearing these stories about people who don't take their holiday. Like everyone should take their annual leave, right? That's the first thing. I don't think that I'm a glass half full kind of person. I have to be, really, because I feel like I'm doing that on behalf of my members. So I always believe in the art of the possible, and it's difficult to maintain a degree of positivity and optimism when you hear the language of cliff edges and catastrophes and tsunamis and all this sort of stuff. So at Homeless Inc, we tend not to use that kind of language, because I do believe that it can sometimes be disempowering. Because I think people get up in the morning and they want to know what difference they're going to make that day, and that's sometimes difficult if you become overwhelmed. So what we try and do is we try and break this down into bite-sized chunks. We try and think, or encourage people to think, if it helps them, to think more locally, even if it's hyper-locally, about what's happening in their street or in their community, in their neighbourhood, and what difference they can make in that space, and think about what they can do as individuals. What can you achieve today or this week or this month as an individual and with your team within your organization to make a difference? And in a way, I would say you don't necessarily have to feel the burden of how that joins up somewhere else in the world. I think it's enough for individuals to know that they've done something today that has made a difference in someone's life. And I think if it's for others to kind of add that up, people in other parts of the system. But I'm very much of the view, and Homeless Link takes this approach to its work, is that we like to talk about what can be done. And of course, that doesn't mean we're naive to the huge kind of social and systems problems that we have, and we do a lot of work at the kind of systems change level, at the political influencing level. But when we're talking about staff waking up in the morning and going into work for another day, I don't think it's particularly helpful to be implying that there's nothing that we can do. I believe that there is a great deal that we can do. So you can interpret it as naivety. It's not, in fact. It's a deliberate choice to be positive.
That's very helpful. Thank you. Ewan.
I'd agree with that. Let's be positive and see that there is potential rather than being defeated. I think defeatist, and that needs to be modelled at leadership level, as does taking your holidays as well. There's nothing worse than the smell of burning matter coming from the chief executive's office isn't a helpful start to the day, is it? But I said there's something else. I mean, I would agree with the other things that Rick said, so I won't repeat them. What's the other thing that I can do with the opportunity faces now? Well, one of them is to make sure that some of the good things that have come out of the COVID experience, particularly the fact that we acted really quickly, and we had the same experience in Scotland. In Edinburgh, we got 5 hotels. There was a bunch of charities collaborated with the government and local authority. We had 700 people in hotels. We've now reduced the number of people rough sleeping in Edinburgh on a regular basis from 120 per day to 12. It's a massive change. Now, we were able to do that because frontline workers were able to make quick decisions based on their relationships and get access to stuff quickly. So my job is to make sure that's not lost, because I can't expect the frontline workers to have to manage that system, but that should be my job. And so the thing is to keep that going. but also paying attention to what's the nature of a long climb. So we now no longer have a night shelter in Edinburgh. The council's block book a hotel, which is quite extraordinary. If I'd said to them in 2019, in February 2019, I think the answer to the night shelter challenge is block booking a hotel that tell me to take a hike. Now they're saying this is a great result because it's a 24-hour service and we can all come to it and all that stuff. You'll know the arguments. But of the 700 people, well, the 830 people who used the hotel instead of night shelter between October and May, October last year, May this year, more than 50% of them were using homelessness services for the first time. So what is it, Elsa, that somebody like myself, how do I need to make sure that we've got the right resources for that group of people so that you don't get spirals in the way that we know happens if you don't get the right result? Because we've got a real opportunity here. People engaging quickly, there's a better quality of crisis opportunity, in terms of getting to a hotel. How do I make sure that we act more quickly with that group of people so they don't end up in the spiral in that long climb as well? So it's trying to think, what does the data tell us about what that long climb is going to be like, as well as the other things we've referenced.
Thank you. Nicola.
Well, we've come through and are still going through massive change in all our sectors, I would say, and it is about, from my perspective, it is about listening to frontline workers, giving them a voice and engaging them. And as Ewan was saying, and Rick was saying, that message of hope. I mean, we've done incredible things. We've moved mountains, really, as a result of this pandemic. And people have come through a lot. And there's a lot of learning that we need to take from that. It's about communication as well. No, that's key. So keeping that communication going with our frontline workers in terms of the services or the things that we're doing with government. And what I'm very keen to do is to give our frontline workers a voice. That co-design approach to development of, for example, our homelessness strategy here. We currently have a housing supply strategy and a call for evidence with it. So we're hosting more events. And we're really keen that people in senior roles give their frontline workers space and time to engage with us. And we want them to the table. We are secretariat for an all-party group on homelessness in the Northern Ireland Assembly. And we're very keen that our frontline workers get a voice and get right in there working with the decision makers. Fingers crossed that we continue to have a government here right to the end of the mandate, but that's a whole other story. So yeah, so it is about it is just about listening. And what I've done recently is I've started to go out to visit projects because I can in that safe environment, and because we're small and we're local, and I'm going to try and do a few every week for as long as I can. And whenever you talking to staff in the front, you talk to management, all the rest of it, but whenever you get talking to the staff in the front line and you get those nuggets, as it says, we put them back through our doors because they don't have a chair to sit on whenever they're given a tenancy. Part of the project, which get them homeless into new tenancies. And what struck me was one of the van drivers said to me, "Do you know what, Nicola, people are sitting on top of the microwaves going, at least I've got something to sit on now." But you get the nuggets of information, say, from our front, and you realize you can make a difference, because if you are able to talk to people who are going to be making the decisions to policy, you can really make a difference. I think that's what motivates staff, obviously supporting our clients as well, supporting the people that we work with. So listening and making sure that we take action on the feedback that we get along with our frontline workers.
Terrific, thank you, Nicola. Katie.
Yeah, really, really agree with Nicola about that listening and that strong voice stuff. I think we've had to do that a lot during COVID, because immediately the public and decision makers in government recognised NHS workers, social care workers for the work that they were doing. There were the claps on the doorsteps, there were various schemes announced for those workers, and deathly silence when it came to homelessness and housing support workers, who are still, as we've said, going out there putting themselves and their families at risk of the infection. So a lot of the work we did throughout the pandemic was really making sure that decision makers understood the reality of the experiences of frontline frontline workers. And I think, you know, we had to fight really hard for that recognition. And it wasn't because people were against it. It was just that, you know, most people are lucky enough to have never needed a homelessness or housing support service, and therefore they're not aware of them. So, you know, particularly where decision making was happening in government, in the Social Care Directorate, fighting really hard for homelessness and housing support workers to get included in the statutory sick pay enhancement scheme that was set up for NHS and social care workers, to be included in the bonus scheme that was set it up for NHS and social care workers, for them to be prioritised in priority group 2 of the vaccine alongside health and social care workers. You know, it was an ongoing battle to try and make sure that they were recognised there. And, you know, so I think, you know, for organisations like ours, being a really strong, robust voice when it comes to government, and not kind of backing down and making sure we're absolutely standing up for frontline workers. I think recognition from the highest level, it made a real difference, and it gave people a real buzz when the minister took time out to come and meet virtually with frontline workers in Wales just before Christmas, reflecting on what they'd done over the past 9 months and taking time to answer questions directly from frontline workers. So it wasn't a rock up, do a 5-minute speech and see you later. It was, I'm genuinely care about this. I value and recognise the work that you've done, and ask me anything, really. And I think frontline workers really value that openness. I think everyone playing their part will be incredibly important. We've seen lots of organisations come together during the pandemic, put that bureaucracy to one side, you know, break down some of the red tape and boundaries. And I have a real fear that as we start to exit the pandemic, that willingness to go the extra mile from other agencies might start to cease. And, you know, both outside of the housing sector in terms of mental health services, etc., but also within the housing sector, where social housing may well have allocated more properties to people exiting homelessness. PRS landlords might have had more empty properties, and I'm a bit concerned that at the time when we need those properties the most, 6,000 people in emergency accommodation in Wales, that some of that will be, right, job done. You know, we've done our bit during the pandemic and now it's time to get back to normal. And I think what our frontline workers need is for all of those organisations and the leadership within them to restate their commitment to working together to make a difference. And I think that if we're able to put those things in place, you know, remove some of the bureaucracy that a few of us have focused on, then that helps frontline workers to get on with the job and do what they do best and make those decisions close to people that are person-centred and well-informed.
Fantastic. Thank you, Nicola. I feel like we've just started a conversation that I could keep going for the rest of the evening, but unfortunately we're out of time and we're not allowed to do that. But I think we must keep this conversation going. We must keep this. We can do that through the Frontline network. People know how to contact us, how to join. We know what everybody else is who's on the call. So please do keep the conversation going. Become part of the Frontline network. Can I thank Ewan, Nicola, Katie and Rick for their time this afternoon. Thank you to everybody who's been part of our conference. We won't see you next year. We'll see you much sooner than that. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks very much.